Hello students, I'm Imkong Tenlapungan from Department of Anthropology, University of Delhi. Today I'm going to speak on the module Population and Development, Basic Concepts from the paper Demographic Anthropology. The learning objectives of the modules are to gain insights about different aspects associated with population studies, to learn different theories of population studies, to know about the contemporary scenario related with population studies. Well, let us first define what is demography. It is the scientific study of human populations primarily with respect to their size, their structure, and their development. There is, however, some tension as to what exactly demography encompasses. For some, it comprises a set of techniques by which data collected in census, surveys, and vital registration systems about age, sex, births, deaths, migrations, marriages, and so on are described, summarized, and manipulated. This is often referred to as formal demography. For others, it is much broader and encompasses the study of fertility, mortality, and migration from a variety of different viewpoints, including sociology, economics, anthropology, etc. As such, it is inherently multidisciplinary, and it is often referred to as population studies, a term which includes the treatment of relation between demographic phenomena and social, economic, or political phenomena. One of the key goals of demography is to understand how population change over time, that is their dynamics. How do populations grow? How do they get mature? How do they age? To answer these questions, it is important to grasp what are the factors through which populations are transformed. In the real world, populations grow or decline through a process of increase and exit. There are several ways through which individuals enter or exit populations. In the most general case, that of the population of a country, there are three categories of entries and exits, that is, births, deaths, and migrations. In fact, the size of a country's population at any point in time, for example, 1st January 2010, can be expressed very simply as 1. The population a year earlier, that is 1st January 2009, plus the number of births that have occurred in the population in the intervening year, minus the number of deaths that have occurred in the population, plus the number of immigrants who have moved into the population, minus the number of immigrants who have moved out of the population. This is what demographers refer to as the balancing equation. The difference between births and deaths is called a population natural increase, whereas the difference between the number of immigrants and the number of immigrants is the net migration. The balancing equation applies to any population at any point in time. It relates two stocks, that is, two counts of individual members of a population taken at 2 points in time by the flows that affect them. A flow is the number of events that have occurred within a population between 2 time points. Now, what is a population? Until now, we have implicitly defined population very broadly, generally equating it to the population of a country. Populations, however, do not need to be as large or to be confined within administrative boundaries. They simply represent a collection of individuals with a common characteristic. In the case of country, this common characteristic is residence. In public health, we also frequently define populations according to their risk behaviors, for example, injecting drug users or their medical history, for example, cancer survivors. The techniques and tools of demography can also be usefully applied to such populations. For example, individuals may enter the population of injecting drug users in New York City by taking up injecting drug use or by moving from another city. They may exit the population if they quit injecting, are incarcerated, or possibly die. The size and growth of the ITU population will depend on which flow is quantitatively more important. Now let us discuss about population pyramids. Population pyramids represent graphically the age or gender structure of a population, that is, how many men and women of a given age or age group are living in the population. They are a specific kind of histograms in which the male population is shown on the left side of the graph and the female population on the right. The youngest are the base of the pyramid, whereas the oldest are at its top. The very oldest are generally omitted from the representation of the pyramid because it is impossible to depict this open-ended interval that contains a few of the oldest old. Percentages are calculated using both sexes combined, that is, the total population as the denominator. A lot can be read from population pyramids. We can trace the history of a population as well as project its future. In particular, one can infer the potential for population growth from a population pyramid. The two pyramids in the picture below represent typical populations. The first pyramid, representing countries in West Africa, is typical of a population with high fertility and high mortality. High fertility means that there are a lot of children in the population, and so the base of the pyramid is wide. By comparison, its top is very narrow because mortality is high and people do not frequently reach the most advanced ages, but especially due to high fertility, children systematically outnumber adults and the elderly. A few countries, mostly in Europe, on the other hand, have reached zero population growth or are experiencing negative growth because of low birth rates and an old age structure coupled with minimal net migration. That is, countries in Europe try to close their borders to new immigration. In such countries, the base of the age pyramid becomes narrower than its upper parts. It is shrinking. By looking at the population pyramids, one can also assess the potential for future growth of a population. The age pyramid of West African countries shown before has a lot of potential for future population growth. If the death rate declines, more and more of the numerous children in the population will survive to the age of childbearing. As a result, more and more women will bear children every year, even if on average each woman does not bear more children, and the births they have will further widen the base. As a result, the population will grow fast. This is a very simple but critical point. Today's children are tomorrow's mothers. Today's 55-year-olds are tomorrow's retirees. Barring a few hypotheses about future trends in fertility, mortality, and migration, demographers can thus use the information contained in population pyramids to project what a population may look like a few years down the road. For example, if we assume that women will keep bearing children at the same rate and that if we assume that women will keep bearing children at the same rate and that people also keep dying at the same rate, then we can infer what the age-sex structure of the population will look like 10, 15, or even 50 years from now using simple arithmetic. Definition of development. Now, important to first distinguish between development as a state or condition, that is static, development as a process or course of change, that is dynamic. Development is not purely an economic phenomenon, but rather a multidimensional process involving reorganization and reorientation of the entire economy. Now let us see social system. Development is process of improving the quality of all human lives with three equally important aspects. These are raising people's living levels, that is income and consumption, levels of food, medical services, education through relevant growth processes. creating conditions conducive to the growth of people's self-esteem through the establishment of social, political, and economic systems and institutions which promote human dignity and respect, increasing people's freedom to choose by enlarging the range of their choice variables, for example, varieties of goods and services. Alternative interpretations of development. Now, development as an economic growth, too often commodity output as opposed to people, is emphasized. Measures of growth in GNP. Note here the persistence of a P-12 economy where the export sector contains small number of workers but draws technology as opposed to traditional sector where most people work and is dominated by inefficient technology. Now let us see the theories of population and development interrelations. Population and development is a complex interrelated system. Many variables are associated with both birth rates and rates of economic growth. The evidence is less inconsistent and inconclusive, suggesting that both arrows are working in the system. Now let us discuss the pessimistic theories, that is, the orthodox view. Supply of some natural resources, that is non-renewable, and capital is fixed. Supply would grow more slowly than the population. Now let us discuss the main points of Malthusian theory. Population tends to increase at a geometric rate. Food can only increase arithmetically. Population expands to eat up any surplus. Subsistence wages forever unless moral checks, choose moral checks or positive checks. According to new Malthusian theory, the years 1940 to 1960 was an era of unprecedented growth of population in the developing world. Colley and Hoover gave alternative projections of GNP for India and Mexico under assumptions of constant fertility and declining fertility, as well as referred to social expenditure on school and health to the young age structure diverted funds from capital investment. Thus, according to Hoover theory, high population growth causes poor socio-economic development and the policy implications such that the government should intervene to control population. Well, the limitations of Hoover theory were assumed economic growth as a function of only capital growth. It does not take into account the changes in technology and labor quality through better health and schooling of new child generation, and relationships were not consistently negative. Now, according to optimistic theories, population growth exerts a positive influence on the economic development, and human ingenuity would create the technology to overcome any environmental constraints to development. Now, Marxism and population refers that a surplus population is a creation of capitalism and a necessary condition for its continuance. Capitalism requires a surplus of readily exploitable manpower, which it creates by seizuring land and by replacing workers with machines. Now let us discuss about the revisionist theory 1. According to the International Population Conference 1974, development is the best contraceptive theory as underdevelopment produces rapid population growth. Policy implications should be to invest resources in developmental activities, set the world economic order right. Let us see revisionist theory 2. International Population Conference 1984 in Mexico. USA position theory, population is a neutral phenomenon in the process of economic development policy implications. Other issues must take priority, for example, the economic reforms, free markets, democracy, etc. Now let us see the current thinking. According to NAS 1986, The scientific evidence, still inconclusive, links more clear at individual or household level rather than at the national or regional level. Implication of rapid population growth vary considerably depending on the economic, cultural, institutional, and demographic differences among LDC. Population growth is not necessarily the principal cause of problem in LDC, but it does multiplies the damage caused by other world problem, unequal population distribution. Just slowing population growth cannot solve such problems, but can contribute to their solution. Now let us see the interrelations. ICPT 1994, Cairo Affirmation of Revisionist 2 with a new paradigm shift. Now let us see the human rights development. Now, the theory, human rights are at the center of concern for sustainable development. Policy implications should be towards advancing gender equality, equity, and empowerment of women are key to population and development related program. The key concepts introduced in this session included theories on interrelationships between population growth and development, Malthusian and new Malthusian theories. The consensus emerged from previous 3 international conferences on population. Now let us look at population growth and specific aspects of development. Population and deforestation and agriculture development, population and employment, population growth and education, population food and nutrition, population and water resources, population and urbanization. Population growth, agricultural stagnation, and environmental degradation. Here, the interrelationship, multiple and synergistic links between rapid population growth, poor agricultural performance, and environmental degradation. Relationships are difficult to analyze as multiple factors affect the rate of population growth, environmental degradation, and base and direction of agricultural development. Bosser hypothesis. Agriculture intensification occurs as population density on agricultural land increases. Sub-Saharan Africa, agriculture expansion rather than intensification. Expansive agriculture involves conversion of large areas of forest, wetlands, river valley bottoms, and grassland savanna to cropland. Agriculture expansion plus rapid population growth equals to accelerated degradation of natural resources, which equals to agricultural stagnation. Now let us discuss about the factors perpetuating the interrelationship. Deficiencies in economic policy environment, for example, agricultural pricing, excessive control of agricultural marketing, lack of empowerment of farmers, slowed the evolution of ancestral systems into systems more sustainable with higher population density, lack of rapid and widespread technological change. Now, traditional tenure systems and the nexus. Rapidly rising population pressure makes effective common ownership regulation increasingly more difficult. Rapid population growth led to an erosion and breakdown in customary laws and rules governing sustainable use and management of land and other common property resources. Now let us look into deforestation, fieldwood, and the nexus. 90% of households in sub-Saharan Africa use wood fuel as the staple source of energy. Slow economic growth will impede the switch to non-wood fuels. Hence, the demand for wood fuel would increase with population growth. Now let us see labor force and population growth. Labor force. Population 15 to 65 years who are actively seeking jobs. Growth of the labor force in future will depend upon age structure of the population. Younger the population, faster will be the growth. Current fertility levels and economic activity rates by age and sex. Now let us look at jobs and population growth. Jobs boost labor demand but definitely pose labor supply. 35 million people will enter global labor force per year. Interaction between population growth and unemployment more acute among nations with younger population. SSA has 45% population under 15 years. Measures to reduce population growth have a delayed effect on labor force size. Now let us see world labor force. Discuss about world labor force. Almost doubled since 1950s, 1.2 billion to 2.7 billion, and currently one-third labor force is underemployed. Creation of 1.7 billion jobs is required to maintain the current levels of employment in the next 50 years. Almost all future growth will be in developing countries. Let us see the aggravating factors. Increasing acceptance of women's labor force participation may be offset by its effect on fertility. Declining global per capita crane length, traditional source of employment, declined by 50% in certain nations since 1950s, and slow pace of industrialization are aggravating factors along with the effect of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And let us look at education and population growth as a global situation. Between 2000 and 2050, the total population will increase by 47%, but population less than 15 years will decline by 3% due to overall slowing population growth rate. Need for education infrastructure will rise very slowly in the next 25 years and decline thereafter. Very young population coupled with persistent high levels of fertility. Child age population will grow by 36% through 2030 before it begins to fall. For some countries, for example, Uganda, Nigeria, Oman, the child age population will grow more than 50% by 2050. Now let us see population and forest cover. Population growth and urbanization has contributed to forest loss all over the world. Between the years 1960 and 1990, there has been loss of 1/5 of all natural tropical forest cover in least developed countries. Asia lost 1/3 of its forest cover, while Africa and Latin America lost 1/6 of its tropical forest cover. Now let us look at the policies aggravating environmental consequences of population. Policies aggravating environmental consequences of population are resource subsidies, use of inefficient technologies for extraction of natural resources, policies affecting population redistribution and consumption patterns. Population and water resources, a precarious balance. Water is not an infinite renewable resource. In both more developed and less developed countries, water supply exceeds sustainable supply. The increase in global demand for water for irrigation, household, and industrial use is predicted to be faster than the population growth. Increase in population affects both quality and quantity of water. Water is the function of both population growth and consumption patterns. Now let us look at the climate change and greenhouse emissions. There has been global warming, rising of oceans, increased flooding, coastal erosion, salinization of aquifers, and coastal cropland. The pattern of here, there has been global warming, rising of oceans, increased flooding, coastal erosion, salinization of aquifers, and coastal cropland. The pattern of precipitation is also likely to change with global warming. The reduced agricultural productivity is linked to both population increase, development, and consumption pattern. Now let us look at the demographic and societal consequences. There has been international and internal migration from rural to urban areas, as well as emergence of big cities and towns. There has been pressure on government social institutions, for example, schools and hospitals. Due to migration and industrialization, there has been disruption of traditional family support systems and increase in crime rate. Now, let us summarize this module. The key concepts introduced in this module are theories on interrelationships between population growth and development, Malthusian and neo-Malthusian theories, and the consensus emerged from previous 3 international conferences on population. It also highlighted the relationship between population growth and agriculture, relationship between population growth, employment and education, and the relationship between population growth and environment. That's all for this module. Thank you so much for listening.